Wednesday at 6 p.m. We go live here on all social medias, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, SoundCloud, and all where you get your podcast channels. If you want to pick up your podcast, you can always just go to iHeartRadio, put in Bridges Live, and put in show 160 is the most recent this number for this show, 160. It'll pop up. You be the judge, and this will be the show. And then you can share it, like it, and share with your friends and have a conversation. One of the things we like to do here in You Be the Judge, and if all you people would love to watch and listen and learn, is that we give information, understanding, and hopefully that turns it into an action. That's always a purpose for us to discuss things, to learn things. But then after that, there's an after. And I think the after, to me, is actionable. I want to share something that went on in my life always, and I wasn't here last week because I had eye surgery, I had a cataract surgery. But here's the thing I learned about from the last week of surgery and today, my emotional roller coaster of today. I realized after I got one eye done, which is over several months ago, and then I got the other eye done, and I realized what I did not see clearly. It's metaphorically, but it's actually true. I did not know the colors and the things I was not seeing or I was seeing and how dull they are. And that's why we do these shows. That's why we started the show. That's why I've been doing all these shows, is for us to see things just a little bit more clear and remove the vision you think you have in the world. Because if you remove that vision, it's probably just a little bit cloudy because it's personal and perceptional. And then if you listen to the ideas and thoughts and hearts of others, it could clear things up for you. And you could see that much better. And I want to share that. And today I was at a school in Annapolis and working with some beautiful men and women, working with our young black and brown boys and girls, and to see that they feel that there's no one seeing them anymore. That's something that I struggle with. So after this amazing day with them, I got to my car and I just cried for about 10 minutes of the plight I see in our youth eyes because they are being targeted, they are being shot at, they are being jailed, they are being incarcerated, they are being harmed emotionally, physically, and spiritually and soulfully. And the only thing our systems have for them is more systems. This is not working. It hasn't worked, and I don't want you to be surprised that it's not working. I'm actually surprised you're surprised. So with that, I want to share that little tidbit as we move on to this amazing show with our amazing guest and my amazing co-host, Marylin. Pierre is running for Circuit Court Judge in Montgomery County, and Judge Claudia Barber, who will maybe soon be here, but if not, we're always here with us in our heart and our mind. So thank you. Marylin, how was your week?
It was fine, but listening to you talk about that, it really saddens me. It would not have saddened me if it's not true, but it's true, and that's why it saddens me. And what happens is that sometimes people have sensory deprivation and they don't even know it. Like I remember I went to Alaska for about 4 or 5 days and I was fine there. I when I got there, I was like, oh, okay, it's kind of gray, you know. And as the days went along, it got brighter and brighter. Then it was time for me to come home. So I came home and the colors here were like technicolor.
Right.
So even though the colors in Alaska were getting brighter and brighter, I was experiencing sensory deprivation and I didn't even know it.
Right.
And I think that's what happened. I think some people talk about it in terms of the boiling fog.
Yes.
You know, yeah, you put a fog in a pot of water and you warm it up a little bit at a time, and the fog doesn't get out because it doesn't feel the difference. And then by the time the water boils, it's too late for the fog. And I think that's what we're talking about. And it's unbelievably sad.
And
Yeah,
the only people that know that it's boiling are the people that's turning it up.
that's true. That's true.
And the people that's
Mhm.
turning it up, Marylin, don't look like you or I.
Yeah. Well, sometimes they do.
Sometimes.
Sometimes they do. And, then, and, and Yeah, we have to keep track of that too. And the people who don't look like you and I who are boiling it up, it's not all the people who don't look like you and I, because
Right.
we have many, many allies, and sometimes we don't say that enough.
Enough. That's
And
true.
we have many people who look like us who are not allies, and sometimes we don't say that enough. So,
We
but
definitely have to
anyway,
start saying that more.
yes, we do.
I
Yes, we
agree.
do.
I agree.
Yeah, and I'm so excited, to introduce, our guest today. Can I go ahead and do that?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I know she's
Well,
patient, but like I said, I'm so excited. She is just such a phenomenal person, that I'm just, like I said, really, really excited.
but
So,
there's our other
uh,
co-host, Judge Claudia Barber.
hey, Judge Barber, how are you? Nice of you to join us right now. Do you want to say something before I introduce our co-host? I'm sorry, before I introduce our guest.
Well, I'm glad to be here again,
Mhm.
and thrilled to be in the audience and love the show. Love the opportunity to share with our audience about critical issues.
Wow.
So, we actually had another round of legislation passed in a different state. I think it was Mississippi.
It
Governor
was.
signed legislation.
Uh,
So, you know, that seems to be a trend in the wrong direction.
well, we have to be vigilant. So, so we're like, oh boy, sometimes you wonder,
Yes,
what
but
it is
glad to
that,
be here
yeah.
and glad to be introduced to our guest.
Oh yes. Oh my gosh. I mean, she's so phenomenal. If I didn't know her in person, I would have thought that a woman like that does not exist. Yeah. So let me go ahead, and you guys will, when I'm done, you guys will feel the same way too. But she's very humble and modest. you so let me introduce you to Dr. Marsha Lynn Coleman Adebayo. Dr. Coleman Adebayo received her AB degree from Barnard College / Columbia University and her doctorate degree from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. We all know that's MIT. She is originally from Detroit, Michigan. She moved to Maryland about 34 years ago when she assumed a professorial position at the American University. Dr. Coleman Adebayo is the author of the Pulitzer-nominated book, No Fear, A Whistleblower's Triumph Over Corruption and Retaliation at the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. The acronym No Fear is short for Notification of Federal Employees Anti-Discrimination and Retaliation Act, hence No Fear. Dr. Coleman Adebayo's fight in the workplace, Dr. Coleman Adebayo's fight for a workplace free of sexism, racism, and retaliation against whistleblowers resulted in an historic lawsuit against the EPA on the basis of sex, race, color discrimination, and a hostile work environment. She subsequently testified before Congress on 2 different occasions. As a result of the leadership that she showed and her testimony, the United States Senate passed the No Fear Act, which was the first civil rights law of the 21st century. Millions of federal workers and their families have directly benefited from Dr. Coleman Adebayo's courageous sacrifice in the protections of the No Fear law. From the floor of the U.S. Senate, after the unanimous vote of the No Fear Act, Senator, oh gosh, I hope I couldn't, Senator Warner called Dr. Coleman Adebayo and told her, young lady, I'm calling you from the well of the Senate floor. The United States has just passed the No Fear Act, the first civil rights law of the century. You have made history. and that's just like one of the things that Dr. Adebayo is famous for. Dr. Coleman Adebayo is the host of the WPFW show, What's at Stake, which airs every 4th Wednesday of the month. She is the first lady of the historic Macedonia Baptist Church in Bethesda, and she is the president of the Bethesda African Cemetery Coalition. Dr. Coleman Adebayo has been inducted into Maryland's Women Hall of Fame Good Housekeeping magazine has selected her as the Woman of the Year in 2003. Time magazine has called her the Rosa Parks of the 21st century because of her bravery in the face of workplace intimidation. She is the recipient of the Montgomery County chapter of the NAACP Unsung Hero Award and the J. Franklin Bourne Bar Association Montgomery County Community Service Award. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Marsha Coleman Adebayo.
Hi, good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Well, you know, Marilyn, she never shortens our skirt at all, but she's right. Amazing, right?
Amazing, right? And she's right there in our county,
in our house.
Mm-hmm. I mean, wow, Good Housekeeping Women of the Year, Time Magazine saying she's the Rosa Parks of the 21st century. It's like, oh my gosh. Now that, you know.
And she went to one of my favorite schools.
Howard?
No, MIT.
Howard is not one of your favorite schools. Okay, that's it. Our friendship is done. You know.
Well,
nice knowing you.
Well, because one of my favorite professors that I have a great admiration for is Noam Chomsky, who I've known for many years, who I've just literally under his tutelage and happen to be blessed enough to, I can call him a friend. He's just an amazing guy, right? And that's what really. But let's get to Miss Dr. Marsha. You being called the Rosa Parks of the 21st century, that is not without much weight on your head. But here's my question for you is, why haven't we all know and be the people that we can be for the change that we want to see? And that has what you've been really emanating probably your whole life. How do we get that out of our young people, old people, or any people? Because that seems to be the question. It's not so much that, why are you amazing? Because you're probably looking at us and saying, you're amazing too, but you got to join the fight.
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. But before I answer that, Noam Chomsky is like my surrogate father. I don't know if you know that, but
I did not.
You did not. Okay. Well, he wrote the introduction to my book, and he was my dissertation advisor. And so Noam and I are very, very, very close. In fact, there's a book coming out, which you're probably in, which is called The Children of Noam Chomsky. And of course, I'm one of the people in the book, and most likely you are too. So yeah, so Noam is an absolutely amazing human being, and he's someone I think who you can't help but be inspired by as you work with him. If you don't mind me giving an antidote, because I've actually never talked about this in public before, but as you can imagine, Noam is, for those of you who know, Noam is considered the father of American linguistics, and he's considered, I think, you know, he's considered one of the most brilliant men in the world. I think I'm not overstating that. So it was quite an honor to work with him, and particularly to be, you know, so close to him. But one of the things that I had problems with when I was working on my dissertation was that he had very little time just to sit down with me and go line for line with my dissertation and give me the kind of direction I felt I needed. And so I worked out a method with his secretary that whenever he was going on a speaking engagement, I would just jump in the back of the car and I would I would just work on my dissertation on the way to wherever he was speaking. But wherever he was speaking, there was always a bomb threat, always a bomb threat. You could depend on a bomb threat. And it would usually go something like this. People would set up the microphone and we'd all sort of take our seats and we're waiting to hear Noam speak. And he would be maybe 5-10 minutes into his speech. And then I'd see this look over the host's face. And I always knew what it meant. It meant that they had just received a phone call that there was a bomb in the building. And so they would take to the microphone and they'd say, ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, you're all going to have to leave the room because we've just received a bomb threat. And most people would go like, ah, and they start running. For me, it was like, yay, because it meant I had 20 solid minutes that I could sit down with Noam and really go over my dissertation with him. So we would always find some small place and we would sit down and talk. At one point, I remember asking him, does it bother you that so many people want to kill you? And he looked at me and he said, Marsha, that is the cost of telling the truth.
Because he said the same, you're right. Everywhere he goes is bomb threat. I had the pleasure of, like, again, meeting him and everyone's so concerned about the bomb threats. He goes, if you're going to put in the work, you're going to disturb the masses.
Absolutely, absolutely. And because of the work that I'm doing now on the cemetery project, which we'll get into, it's a project that's worth over $100 million, and we have stopped. We've actually run out 3 developers out of Bethesda, Maryland at this point, multi-million-dollar corporations. We've sent them running out of this area. And that's always with risk. And people aren't happy when they're losing millions and millions, perhaps billions of dollars, and they come after you. But that is the cost of that is the cost of telling the truth, and that you have to accept that cost. One of maybe a way of answering your question is that, we don't have the kind of input, the apathy that you're talking about with the young people who work in the Bethesda African Cemetery Coalition, which is the coalition that is dedicated, passionate about saving the African burial ground here in Bethesda, Maryland. We just don't have that kind of apathy because our young people are busy telling the truth. They are busy fighting the good fight. They are busy organizing, making signs, writing letters, taking on politicians. They are busy changing and making history. And so they simply do not have time to wallow in the kind of sort of a self-indulgence that this society likes to perpetuate among our youth. They are busy about changing history and making history themselves. And I think in many ways, that is the way we begin to get our children out of this sort of navel gazing that this society likes to perpetuate among our youth, where they spend so much time thinking about themselves and their hair and their nail colors and whatever else, anything but changing history. Because once our children are engaged in the process of changing history, that becomes their focus. And that means that they really fight very hard for a good education because they want to know everything there is to know. They want to know what isn't being taught in school. They want to know how do they make sure the next generation isn't inflicted with the kind of lack of education that they were inflicted with. So, I mean, I think that I think our most incredible achievement in the Bethesda African Cemetery Coalition is actually not running out 3 developers out of Montgomery County, which is what everyone thinks our major accomplishment is. Because if you go to downtown Bethesda, you will see all these huge buildings that have been put up in the last 2 or 3 years. If you go to downtown Washington, D.C., which is where I was today, you can't even recognize portions of our community anymore because they've been taken over by developers. But I think our most important achievement is that we have created a cadre of young people around us in the Bethesda African Cemetery Coalition who are absolutely passionate about changing history and about their role in becoming leaders and stopping the kind of cruelty and racism and white supremacy that has afflicted our community. I think that is really our achievement. And I think for those of us, who are my age and older or younger, that really has to be our focus. In addition to stopping, the cruelty that's going on, the white supremacy that's going on, is raising up a cadre of young people who are prepared to fight.
You said something that's just amazingly, and I'm not going to go political on you because there is Mark Eldridge says that it doesn't seem like he could ever make you happy, and which is fascinating that he said this in a meeting, and he did not know that you were going to be on our show, but it doesn't matter. Thinking that why do you have to make her happy? Why don't you just do what you know you can do and then make it and we all be happy? But here's the question I have when you have statements like that coming from white politicians or any of the black politicians. The things that they're doing, it's purposeful and they have to be called out on it.
Right.
So how do we help you call it out? Because I don't think enough people are calling people who are in office, out of office, or the key turners are calling what it is. They are moving the systematic racism that is pushing black people into the death or to the gravestone.
Mm-hmm.
How do we get people to call them out? Because you have been calling them out.
I intend to call them out as long as God gives me a voice. You know, my shero, everyone has someone that they channel, I think. Outside of my mother and my grandmother, you know, I channel Harriet Tubman. I really do not care what Mark Eldridge says about me. I don't care what he thinks about me. I could care less about whether he, you know, I just don't care about him. He's not important to my life. The only thing that's important in my life is whether or not we get justice. And the fact is that Mark Eldridge is so used to working with Black people who are prepared to compromise on very basic issues, that when he comes in contact with a Black woman who says, "You have finally hit a rock," he doesn't know what to do with it. And so the only thing that Mark can think to do about that is to start calling me names. And he calls me names, you know, if you've heard some of the names he's called me in public, it's just absolutely outrageous. And there will be Black people sitting in the audience listening to him, calling a Black woman all kinds of names, and they will not open their mouth to say one word. And so we've got to change this dynamic. We have to change this paradigm where white people who are oppressing us, who are white supremacists, who depend on Black people to get into office, feel comfortable calling out Black people who have called them on their racism and their white supremacy. I intend to continue to call Mark Eldridge out on his racism, his white supremacy. I think what we should write on his tombstone is here lies a white man who desecrated an African burial ground. And so one of the things that we have this new campaign with Mark Eldridge that you're probably going to see in in a week or so. And it's a beautiful picture, well, whatever, but it's a picture of Mark Eldridge. And it says, "My name is Mark Eldridge, and I desecrated an African burial ground." Because Mark cannot stand the truth. He can't stand the truth. And he's used to being around Black people who are concerned about getting a contract from him or trying to get a job from him or trying to butter him up for whatever reason. That is not our position at all. Our position is that we want, Mark could have stopped the desecration of this incredibly, one of the most historically significant African burial grounds in the world 5 years ago, before they literally sent in all the trucks and they scooped up tons and tons and tons of our ancestors and put them in the back of dump trucks and sent them to a private landfill. And what did we find when we got to the landfill? Because we followed the trucks. They had a crusher truck out there and they had a steamer truck out there because they were trying to destroy any kind of criminal evidence that was possible that was coming out of that cemetery. Mark knew about it. I sent him pictures. I sent him video. He never responded because he is so busy kissing up to developers that he can't stand even to be in the shadow of the truth. And so we have called Mark out on this, and I think he's disgraceful. I've told him he's disgraceful in public. I've told him he's disgraceful in private, and I will continue to do that. I think that Black people, because of our trauma,
Mm-hmm.
and our trauma, I think it's almost sewn in our DNA, we find it so hard to somehow get past the fear of what white people can do to us if we tell them the truth. And I think it's an individual struggle. And I think we all have to struggle with that, because what we experienced, whether it was on River Road in Bethesda, or whether it was in North or South Carolina, Georgia, wherever we were, that trauma is still with us. And we have a lot of trouble just sort of bypassing what it means to tell a white person to their face, that they are, that they're destroying us, they're destroying our family, that they're hurting us, that there's pain. And so we sometimes stay silent.
Uh-huh. Yeah, and what you're saying is that has actually been proven scientifically. They did research on mice where they show that trauma could be carried in a mouse's in a mouse's body, that is passed on to a generation, to the next generation, even though that the baby mouse never experienced the actual trauma itself. It's an incredible experience. Okay, I have to back you up a lot because people, not everybody here is from Montgomery County, so not everybody here knows that Mark Elrich is the county executive, and not everybody here is as familiar with the issue of the Bethesda Cemetery and the Bethesda Cemetery, the Bethesda African Cemetery Coalition. So if you could go back to 5 years ago, how this all got started, why there is such why is there such animosity now between the people from the Bethesda African Coalition and its supporters and other members of Montgomery County, and bring us up to the present now? That would be very helpful. But I think a lot of people need background information on that, because I don't think they're quite understanding what we're discussing right now.
But before Dr. Coleman speaks, I want, before she says something, Judge Claudia Barber had said this many times. If we don't tell our story, it's being told for us. And a lot of people are trying to wipe us out of existence through our history. And every time they put one of us in jail, every time they do something to us, they are literally trying to eradicate us from the face of this earth. And they're doing it in such sneaky ways, and the populace doesn't know what's going on. But we feel the pressure every time we go anywhere and everywhere, and then they wonder why we are so traumatized with so many things. I just had to say that before. And Judge Claudia Barber probably wants to say something on that.
Well, I agree with what you're saying there. There is oftentimes, when somebody speaks truth to power, some people just can't handle it. And to the extent that they can't handle it, there's this, you've got to be aware of these Vladimir Putins that exist in this country. It's a lot of them. They come up with a false narrative. They're just Pinocchios, and they just, put out the false narrative. It isn't what you said it was. It's something else, So now they've got the conservatives even have a false narrative as to why Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson is not qualified to serve on the Supreme Court. She didn't tell us what her LSAT scores were. So now they got a false narrative going that she's not qualified. They want to tell you what the qualifications are. Or they want to define the qualifications. Oh, her reversal rate is this. Well, did you all measure all that when Earl Warren was being considered and nominated, and the rest of them, and the rest of the Supreme Court, Abe Fortas and all the rest of them? Did you all go through that analysis and disclose to everybody their LSAT scores or anything to that liking? What about Elena Kagan, Sonia Sotomayor? So these people are trying to control the narrative and spread it in whatever way they want to suit their fancy. The law is whatever they say it is. You know, you're qualified if they say you're qualified. And it's traumatizing to the victim, to people that are on the receiving end. And we've got to be very, very careful and cautious of people who do that. Create false narratives.
Exactly, which is why Dr. Coleman Adebayo is going to tell us about the Bethesda African Cemetery Coalition.
Yeah, in terms of the background, and apologies for jumping in, assuming everyone had heard about this. But about 5 years ago, my husband became pastor at Macedonia Baptist Church, which is the only remaining Black church in Bethesda, Maryland. There were a number of Black churches in this area, because this area between mid-1700s and 1865, there were language is such a funny thing, isn't it? Because since we're using their language, we tend to think that that's normal language and that it describes something. And in fact, it's just, we were just forced to use someone else's language. And so one of the things that they did was they called places where we died, places where we went to die, they called them plantations. But in fact, they were death camps for us. When we went to those spaces, we went there to be worked to death. And maybe there were plantations for the guys sitting on the porches, but when we were in the field, we were there to be worked to death. So I'm going to use some language that maybe some of you are not familiar with, and I'll try to remember to sort of translate that when I do it. But there were 4 death camps on River Road, and these were fairly large death camps. The Posey and the Loftboro and the Councilman and the Shoemaker, and we're talking thousands and thousands and thousands of Africans who were forced to work until they died on River Road. Now, for those of you who are not from this area, Bethesda, Maryland is one of the richest communities in the world, not in the United States. It is one of the richest communities in the world. And it has done an incredible job of erasing every trace of Black history from what you would consider its history. In fact, if you come to downtown Bethesda, you would not believe that any Black people outside of the people who work in the stores even live in Bethesda. It is a city that has successfully implemented critical race theory, where Black people just simply do not exist, except as workers. And so you've got the Whole Foods and the Banks of America and all that. But what you don't realize is that every place you walk, there is blood under the soil. Every place you walk. In this area that we call the River Road Corridor, there is blood under the soil. And so for about 250 years, Africans were brought from West and Central Africa to this part of Bethesda, Maryland, because they had particular skills and technologies, advanced skills and technologies that were available in Africa that Europeans did not have and needed to be able to create the kind of commerce that they needed to have in this area. And so they kidnapped all of these Africans and they brought them to a place called Bethesda, Maryland. And to a large extent, the death camps in Bethesda were camps that grew tobacco and some other kinds of plants, but primarily tobacco. Because there was obviously a market for tobacco in the United States, and there was a market for tobacco in Europe as well. So these death camps thrived and were very wealthy, and these people all became extremely wealthy people, the Loftboros and the Councilmans and all these people. And then about 1808, as some of you may know, tobacco is extremely hard on the soil. It depletes the soil's nutrients. And so that happened also on River Road, where after they had cultivated the soil for some time, the soil became depleted. And so the question is, what was going to be their next commercial enterprise if tobacco was no longer available? And so many of these deaf camp owners, called plantation owners, if you will, decided that they would go into the breeding of young African girls. And that is sort of where a lot of my research has taken me at this point. And so they started breeding young African girls. As early as they started actually renting. In fact, I just got back from Cambridge, Maryland yesterday because as you know, with Harriet Tubman, they started renting out Harriet Tubman when she was 5 years old. And so they started renting out and they started abusing these little African girls at very, very, very early ages. We now know that 60% of these little African girls bled out during childbirth. So this is, when I talk about it being a killing field, I'm literally talking about the soil under which you walk in Bethesda being a killing field. Well, you know, because so much of the land was still being used for productive agricultural usage, there was one part of the land area that if you come and visit us, I'll show you, that was swamp area on this strip of land. It was just agriculturally unproductive land. And so this is where they would throw the bodies of the Africans who who bled out during childbirth or just died from just harsh conditions, or they starved to death or died from a number of diseases. And so this is literally, we believe now, one of the largest mass graves in the United States. And this is now what we call the Moses Macedonia African Cemetery. And so they would literally throw these bodies into these unmarked graves. After emancipation around 1911, the relatives of the people who had been buried in what we call the Moses Macedonia African Cemetery bought land right next to where their relatives were buried. This process was done through an organization called White's Tabernacle number 38 of the brothers and sisters, sons and daughters of Moses. Now we've been sort of trying to decide whether the reference to Moses was to the prophet Moses, or whether it was really to Harriet Tubman, because one of the things that we found out is that our historic Macedonia Baptist Church was most likely a station on the Underground Railroad as well. So that's a mystery that we just haven't figured out yet, but it's an intriguing history. And so you can imagine, my husband becomes pastor of this church. We have very little knowledge about this history because we're just, I was teaching at the American University at the time, and he becomes pastor, and he was teaching at the University of the District of Columbia. And we don't know any of this history because none of this history is available to the public. This is all hidden history. This is all erased history. But then we begin to realize that there were families that started talking about the fact that my grandmother used to live where the Bank of America is located now. Another member said, oh, where Whole Foods is located, that was my family's farm. And so we started putting this history together. Like, you mean there were Black people in Bethesda and they were members of your family? And so one of my first official duties as First Lady of Macedonia was to go to a place that I had, quite frankly, never heard of before, which was the Montgomery County Parks and Planning Commission. I mean, I didn't know what they did. I didn't know who they were. And I went down there and they basically were telling us that there was a sector plan, that they needed our approval. They wanted us to sign off on a sector plan. And I remember the director, Gwen Wright, looked at me and she said, Dr. Coleman, you may have heard that there was a cemetery near your church, but I want you to rest assured that that's just a myth. There are no cemeteries in your area. And so you can feel very comfortable signing off on the sector plan. Well, there was a deacon who was sitting right next to me who grew up in the area. And he raised his hand and he said, Miss Wright, he said, there's no myth about a cemetery that used to be on River Road. I used to play in that cemetery as a child. And I remember when the bulldozers came in and they wiped out the cemetery and they chopped up the bodies and they spread the bodies throughout the entire area. And then they put a parking lot on top of members of my church. I remember that. And
awful. That's terrible.
And I remember sitting there listening to this for the first time in my entire life. Now, I've only been a first lady of the church for 2 weeks, and all of a sudden, all of this history is just being, and I remember looking at her and I said to her, I said, Miss Wright, where are the bodies? Can you tell me what happened to the bodies of the members of my church? Where are they? And she said, I don't know. I said, Miss Wright, we're looking at a crime scene. We are looking at a crime scene. You need to call the police right now. And we need to file an investigation. Where are the members of my church? And at that point, she said, I think this meeting is over.
Okay.
I think we need more time to think about this. So why don't we call this meeting to a close, and then I'll reschedule another meeting. And that was sort of the spark that started the whole process. You asked, how did it start? It's because they started lying to us.
Okay, but Dr. Coleman, here's a kicker that I want you to pause so people digest that this person did not view it as a crime because it had nothing to do with her people. And
yes.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So this is exactly why we pull our hair out. This is why we're angry.
Traumatized.
Yeah, and we're angry, right? And then they wonder why are you so angry? Okay, I can name 3 today, not 3 weeks ago. I can name 3 reasons today. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm talking to a person that has access, availability, and the rules at your feet, and you don't even call it a crime. So if I call it a crime, you're just going to say what to me? And this has gone on in our communities since the beginning. Forever, right?
It's forever.
And
okay, so just say it like it is.
And here's the thing. Whoever is crying out, we don't cry the loudest to be heard, because the only people that hear us are the people that have nothing to do with it. Mm-hmm. They have to say something.
But you got to be very careful of government. She gave you a government answer too.
Good Lord.
You a government answer.
Mm-hmm. Right. It was interesting because we obviously found pro bono lawyers. Thank God for pro bono lawyers, and thank God for all of you who do pro bono work. I thank you very much. And so we got into discovery, and we actually found videotapes where they're actually talking to each other about the cemetery. And we also found we had emails, traffic between these people who were literally saying to each other, they were taking the county council members out to this area because there was a sector plan underway. And I think Gwen Wright is writing to someone else saying, if any member of the county council asks you whether or not there's a cemetery there, refer them to me, and I will answer all the questions regarding the cemetery. So there's a cover-up going on.
Okay. Just call it what it is. That's what it is.
A cover-up going on.
Don't sugarcoat it. That's it.
It was a
That's it.
cover. It was a cover. They never wanted people who live in these $2 million homes in Bethesda, Maryland, to realize that they're literally sitting on top of graveyards. And so they were prepared to do whatever it took to hide all this information. And so what we've been doing and not only that, I've got to tell you, this is something we learned a year ago. There's actually a plantation home 5 minutes from the cemetery. It was the Loftboro plantation home. It was where one of the first signals homes to Berkeley, sort of one of the initial sort of pre-CIA kind of operations going on, because we live so close to the South, and that's another whole story. But there's a plantation home called the Milton House. You can all go to it. And it is a plantation house. Now, what's interesting about this is that Montgomery County school system will send our children to Alabama and Georgia to have the Southern experience when they can just go to downtown Bethesda.
For sure.
And see a plantation house.
For sure.
And in this plantation house, you have basically the cell, the incarceration area, where they kept these young African girls. Can you imagine? It's a steel enclosed room. Can you imagine in Washington, D.C. weather in the late, 1700s, early 1800s, mid 1800s? There's no air in here. And where these little girls and these boys were kept as they were being trafficking from one place to another. There's a smokehouse right outside of the kitchen. And we know from oral history that smokehouses had two functions. One was to smoke meat to get folks through the winter, but it was also used as a crematory.
That's right.
It was used as a crematory for Africans who were trying to escape. And so you've got a crematory right outside the kitchen area. You have the overseer's house right underneath where the Africans are being kept on the top floor. You really do have to see this place. And one of our major discoveries, because now we're writing a second book on this, is that now we found a second plantation house right on River Road. Right on River Road. We're also with the torture chambers and the rape room and which they've turned into a sunroom.
I'm going to interject something real quick that most people don't know this. I was doing some issue with a friend of ours, Vincent Leggett. Some of people know who Vincent Leggett is, right? And I'm doing some work with him about the historical factor on here on the Chesapeake. And was going to do a Smithsonian thing of the Black people that went through the Chesapeake. And he said he had heard this through family members. So he's in this meeting with the Smithsonian, and they say, if you don't have it written down, we cannot call it to be truthful. That's what they told him. He said he had to go outside before he hurt someone. And he says, if it's not written down, it's not truthful. So because like you said, from our oral history, from mouth to ear, right? That's how we spoke. That's how we got our words through many things. Right. If it wasn't written down, these white people don't call it truthful.
And also we know that oral history is incredibly accurate.
Right.
I mean, as a political scientist, I can tell you we've spent hours and hours, gathering oral history. It's amazing how oral history, the accuracy of our memories. I mean, the whole griot concept from Africa that, that your tongue could almost be cut out if you miss a particularly important fact of history. The history was so prized, and the telling of history was placed at such a high price that people really took care to make sure that they told the facts and the narratives correctly. And Brother Harvey Matthews, as far as we are concerned, who we've learned so much about what happened on River Road, is a national jewel. He's an absolute national jewel for us. And also, I should tell you about Mr. Leggett. Mr. Leggett, he actually invoked eminent domain to save a Jewish cemetery. Now, our county executive, Mark Elrich, has told me personally, he will never invoke eminent domain to save a Black cemetery. But Ike Leggett did invoke eminent domain to save a Jewish cemetery. And so one of our demands right now is for Mark Elrich to follow the lead of Mr. Leggett and to invoke eminent domain to save Moses African Cemetery. It was so bad 2 years ago when they first started digging up a portion of the cemetery. We have about 30,000 pictures of the desecration of Moses Cemetery. We have pictures of archaeologists walking around the cemetery with bones in their hands. Bones in their hands.
So now what about the Department of Justice? What have they done?
Well, you know, we have, if someone here has great contact, please let us know. We've written, we've not received a response. And we desperately need to get someone over Montgomery County, some political officials over Montgomery County to help us. Because as long as this fight remains within the confines of Montgomery County, we're going to lose it. We need to get either the state to come in or the federal government to come in, because there is no political will for the people in Montgomery County to stop the atrocity that is going on in Montgomery County. We actually have one picture I wish I had brought. We have a picture of a tombstone that came up during the excavation. We started yelling and screaming at the archaeologists. First of all, they will not let Black people into the cemetery unless you work for the developer. And so they have a big gate around the cemetery and they have guards out there. And then whenever we come out, they call Montgomery County Police on us. So all of us have been arrested at this point. And so they will not. And even Mark has gone into the cemetery and never once said, I will not go into that cemetery unless I'm accompanied by a descendant. He just walks in there with all of his whiteness. And they tell him, and also State's Attorney McCarthy. McCarthy actually went into Moses Cemetery at the invitation of the developer. And he asked the question, have you seen any remains? Well, what do you think the developer said to him? No. We don't have any remains around here. Well, that's good enough for me, right? That's good enough for me.
Was that his response?
I have a letter from McCarthy in which he said that he went to the cemetery. He asked them whether or not they had found remains. They denied any remains. He never asked us to see the 30,000 pictures that we have of the desecration, but we sent them to him anyway. And our attorneys asked McCarthy for an appointment, and he refused to meet with our attorneys, but he met with the developers. And he says in his letter, he said, you know, if you find any remains, you should know that that is a violation of law. You must contact my office and you must, you know, inform the office that you found remains. So when we sent him our evidentiary document with all these remains, we thought he was going to at least say, well, okay, well, we have to investigate this. Not a single word, not even acknowledging our letter that we sent to him.
Dr. Coleman.
Can you please talk a little bit about the lawsuit and where it is now?
Okay.
The lawsuit. This is fabulous, right? So for the first time in the history of the United States, Africans who never had a voice when they were alive in the American judicial system was heard in an American courtroom through their descendants. And we won. That's important for you to hear. We won. So Montgomery County decides that they're going to sell, and according to the Housing Opportunities Commission, that our social justice movement was just too much for them to take. And so they decided that they were going to sell a portion of Moses Cemetery to a developer. Our lawyers jumped into, filed a lawsuit to stop them from selling our ancestors. And so we received a preliminary injunction. to stop. Now, this is a $50 million project, and we stopped these people. And then we went back and we
Huge win. That's a huge win.
Absolutely. It had never been done before for an African burial ground. Now we figured out that the real value of this land is really not $50 million. It's really $100 million, because they were able to turn over this land within 5 years. And so they're thinking that is in another 5 years, they'll be able to double their profit. But for the first time in the history of our country, Africans who never had a voice in that courtroom. And the judge who heard the case was Judge Carla N. Smith. And if you don't mind, if I have a second, I will read you what she wrote. And if you have a chance to read her opinion, it is like reading a book of poetry. It is absolutely.
No, please read it.
She wrote, the court cannot ignore that as early as the 1930s, when construction began in the River Road community, the deceased have been forgotten, forsaken, and their final resting places destroyed, or at a minimum desecrated. This is Thurgood Marshall language. This is Thurgood Marshall. She is talking about a community that is destroyed. That's the language she's using. She's saying at a minimum, they were desecrated.
Dr. Coleman, we know throughout the Southern history that people think is so far ago with the Citizen Council and the different states having different organizations that targeted and influenced Black people to get them killed and infiltrated them in all kinds of ways.
Right.
From your belief, because I have my belief that my answers before I even ask it is a yes. Does Montgomery County have that type of Citizens Council moving through Montgomery County so it can hold what it's been doing for this long? I mean, because with the incarceration rate so high, Maryland incarceration so high, and we know that the Maryland's almost like a proving ground for everything from, it's called the New South, right? So if Maryland's the proving ground for all the southern states and for the North to react on, is there a citizen council moving through our actually state, local government that's holding this to be the same status quo? Because people are saying how everything is so disgusting and the information, so it's unbelievable that we have to live this way and we have to do this. But yet, for as many years, I'm new to Maryland, but every time I do my research and digging, this is not new that's going on. So they allow this to continue to go status quo to status quo. Marilyn Pierre has been running for circuit court judge. This is the third time. Maryland's his third time?
Right.
Okay, so this isn't new of the stuff that's been going on in the Good Old Boys Network of what they've been trying to do, trying to push on, push out, and silence.
So I'd like for you to send me more information about the decision and the outcome and the existence, because I know that we have a newsletter with the Anne Arundel County NAACP, and I realize it focuses on Anne Arundel County news, but this is an important story, and it's got to be shared. It's got to go out there. It has got to be spread among everybody, because the government is just up to their same old status quo, you know, create a false narrative, make us believe it, tell us the truth is a lie, you know, all of that.
Right. I mean, one of the reasons why I've got to get this in before we hang up, before this program is over. I mean, one of the reasons I can't do this as head of, I can't throw my support behind political candidates as president of Bethesda African Cemetery Coalition, but I certainly don't give up my constitutional rights to do so as an individual. And so one of the reasons why obviously I support Marylin Pierre and I support Bernice North is because these are women who I believe can make a difference in Maryland. We need someone who is prepared to get in there and fight, because, you know, Maryland, particularly Montgomery County, has a veneer of being a super liberal organization, when in fact it is just the opposite. It is one of the most racist, white supremacist organizations in the United States, we have a population, African Americans compose about 38% of the population in Maryland, but 70% of those incarcerated. Think about that for a second. Think about that for a second. 70%, and we're only 38% of the population. Right. I mean, some of us should be sleeping at night,
right,
knowing that we have a whole, and these are young Black men who are being incarcerated for longer sentences than their white counterparts. They are literally stealing the lives of our children. They're literally stealing the lives of our children. None of us should be sleeping at night knowing our children are being incarcerated. Their lives are being stolen away. And just to answer your question, look, what Montgomery County has done, even the Ku Klux Klan was incapable of doing. I mean, I grew up in the Deep South where they desecrated African graves, and they always did it at night. And they always covered their heads, their faces when they would go out to the Black cemetery in my little part of the South. They put on their little hoods or whatever they could find, and they would do it at night. Montgomery County desecrates in the middle of the day, and they desecrate using permits and license and all kinds of, made up legal tools.
Well, what this looks like to me.
What I will say is that Montgomery County is more efficient. They're more efficient than the Klan. They're more efficient than the Klan. And that's the reason why we have to fight, because this kind of efficiency is literally taking our community out.
Judge Barber, hold on. Wilbur has a question. Go ahead, sir.
Okay. Sometime in the 1970s, the Montgomery County Sentinel had on its first page the following statement. In 1900, more than half the people in Montgomery County were African Americans. Now, is that a surprise? It was surprised me in the 1970s. Is that a surprise, or is that something you should be able to get right out of the census reports?
Well, yeah, you can certainly get that out of the census reports. That wouldn't be very difficult. But for example, in the community that I live in West Bethesda, we were 70% of the population here, and now we're 3%. So I mean, so that's an even starker kinds of contrast than what you're talking about. They've been able to move populations out of Montgomery County through taxation, through raising the prices of homes, making it less possible for multi-generational dwelling, housing opportunities for families. They have made it, and also I should say, as a mother, my son, I have a beautiful son, 6'2", 240 pounds when he was in high school at Whitman High School, and I had to take him out of the school and put him into private school because I didn't think it was safe for my son to be in that school. He was being sent to the principal's office all the time for small infractions. The grades that he was receiving were not appropriate for the kind of work he was doing. And so I literally, even though I was paying, an enormous amount of taxes in this county, I moved my son out of Montgomery County School and sent him to Archbishop Carroll in Northeast Washington, where he absolutely thrived and eventually went to Howard University, by the way.
What bison?
So I'm just trying to say, on so many levels, psychologically, emotionally, physically, in terms of, as the majority of the young people in our group are white young people. And they talk about the trauma of seeing a desecration in their lifetime, of actually seeing remains come up through the ground and having the workers smile at them while they take their boots and crush the bones. I mean, that's a part of their memory as well. And so, it's one of the reasons why I think our young people are so committed, because they're actually seeing the fact that we can fight back. And if I know the time is going very quickly, and it's probably time to to say goodbye fairly quickly. But I did want to just say that one of the lessons that we've learned from this particular struggle is that you can win. You can win. It takes a lot. You have to almost make it a full-time job, which is what I've done at this point. But you can win. But more importantly, you can influence the youth. And you can teach the youth how to win these kinds of struggles. And those are the lessons that they take into adulthood. And and at some point they begin to understand that they do not have to tolerate white supremacy and that they can fight back.
I'm emotional right now because my heart is filled with lots of tears, and I'll cry later because I'm okay with crying. I'm okay with feeling not despaired and I don't feel broken.
No.
But I am sad.
Mm-hmm.
And I am sad, and I'm okay to be sad.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's the reason why I fight. It's the reason why I do everything. It's the reason why I live. It's the reason why I wake up every day to make a difference, so we can live a life, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I want to say thank you, because thank you, because right now I can't. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I must tell you that every time we had a demonstration today in front of Parks and Planning, and we're doubling our size. We go to Parks and Planning every single Wednesday at 12 noon. So if you have time, meet us at Parks and Planning next Wednesday, 12 noon. Tomorrow we are meeting Mark Alrich. He's at a fundraiser tomorrow. I believe it's at 4 o'clock. We will be there challenging Mark Alrich to invoke eminent domain. He will say, I can't do anything, but we will still challenge him. And we have weekly meetings Thursday at 7 o'clock. You can get everything from Marylin Pierre. She can give you all of our information. We need help. And I am not, I'm not cautious and I'm not embarrassed to say we need help, because the only way we are going to win this kind of battle is when our community comes together. And one last thing I've got to say, and I can tell you when to say something, Marilyn, we are our ancestors and our ancestors are us. And we learn something about courage by understanding something about our ancestors. Our ancestors were awesome. They struggled against odds and obstacles and challenges that we cannot even imagine. And they won. And they won. And we have to understand, and we have to tap into that reservoir of energy and power that our ancestors had. And when they disconnect us, when they erase us, what they're doing is unplugging us from our power base. And what we're doing is we're reconnecting into our power base, so that when you see us out there and you think, God, these people, aren't they afraid? The answer is no, we're not afraid, because we have plugged into our ancestors and they're giving us power, and we plugged into God. Because I am a first lady of a church, and I'm very proud of the fact that I'm a first lady of a church. And so Psalms 27 says to me, the Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? And it certainly is not Mark Alrich. So when I go out and I fight, I am not afraid of anybody out there, because I've plugged into some power that makes me fearless. And that's what I'm inviting all of you to do, is to plug into that power.
We've been fighting for the Police Accountability Board and challenging the SROs in the schools, and they're still trying to backdoor that and put it in there. We've been having these meetings with these people that are so surprised we're upset. And this is where it makes me think, like, this is still such a planned thing, and we can get into that. Please, Dr. Coleman, you come back on again. There's more for us to learn, and there's more for us to share. We don't have enough time for people to ask questions, but we will definitely have Dr. Coleman back on. And I will, if anyone wants to say anything, Marilyn, you want to say anything before we take off?
I just want to say that I was right, because at the beginning I told you how fabulous Dr. Marsha Coleman Adebayo. She wouldn't let me call her Dr. Coleman. It was always Coleman Adebayo, which is why it rolls off my tongue so easily
Yeah.
now, since I had to practice it. But it was worth it. Yeah, I told you how fabulous she was. And we could also say that Time Magazine was right, because she is the Rosa Parks of the 21st century.
Ashante, Ashante.
I shut it. So thank you very much for joining us. We're really looking forward to this, having this conversation be put online so people could watch it and take in some of this fabulous information that Dr. Coleman Adebayo shared with us.
Thank you.
And we look forward to seeing you next